She knew his name before he ever said a word. She knew his signature, because that signature had appeared on the paperwork that erased her father's career, his dignity, and eventually his will to live. She knew his face, because she had stared at it in fury during the darkest nights of her life, when her brother was unconscious on a hospital floor, and she had no one left to call. So when Landon Mercer smiled at her across that dinner table, like he was just another lonely man looking for decent conversation, Hannah Brooks smiled back and said absolutely nothing. If you want to know what happened next, stay with me until the end, hit like, and drop the name of the city you're watching from in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. The dinner was not the kind Hannah would ever attend voluntarily. It was held in a private room on the 43rd floor of a midtown Manhattan hotel, the kind of place where the water glasses cost more than her hourly wage, and the floral arrangements alone could have covered 2 months of her brother's medication. She was there because the catering company had called her at 4:15 that afternoon, 45 minutes before her after-school art session ended, offering her a Thursday night shift at double her usual rate. She needed the money. She always needed the money. So she said yes, ironed her black uniform shirt in the school bathroom with a travel-sized wrinkle spray, and took the subway uptown with a granola bar for dinner because there was no time for anything else. The room held 14 people, mostly men, mostly the kind of men who interrupted each other constantly and laughed too loud at things that weren't funny. Hannah moved through the space with the particular invisibility that experienced servers learn, quiet, efficient, present without being noticed. She refilled glasses, she cleared plates. She kept her expression neutral even when one guest snapped his fingers at her like she was a dog. Landon Mercer was sitting at the far end of the table. She recognized him immediately. She had prepared for this. She had known his name was on the guest list when the shift supervisor handed her the evening brief in the service corridor downstairs. She had stood very still for a moment, reading his name on that paper, feeling something cold move through her chest. Then she had folded the paper, tucked it into her apron pocket, and told herself it didn't matter. He was a guest. She was staff. She would pour his water and keep her mouth closed and take her paycheck home. What she had not prepared for was the moment he looked up. Not the way the other men at the table looked at her, through her mostly, or at her in a way that made her want to take a step backward. Landon Mercer looked at her the way people look at someone they're genuinely trying to place, like she reminded him of something he couldn't quite name. It lasted maybe 2 seconds. Then he looked back down at his phone, and Hannah continued around the table, and nothing happened. Nothing happened for the next hour. It was near the end of the evening, when the other guests had started filtering out in clusters of 2 and 3, that the situation changed. Hannah was collecting the last of the glassware from the far end of the table when she heard the chair scrape back and felt someone standing close behind her. "Excuse me." She turned. He was closer than she expected. In photographs, and she had looked at photographs, against her better judgment, on the nights when grief turned into something that needed a target, he looked like what he was. Polished, constructed, the kind of handsome that came from good lighting and expensive tailoring and never having to worry about anything. In person, he looked tired. Not the tired of a long week, deeper than that. The tired that lives behind a person's eyes when they've been managing something heavy for a very long time and have gotten skilled enough at it that most people can't see it anymore. "I think you got the wrong glass," he said. He was holding out a half-full glass of sparkling water. "That one was mine. This one's yours to take." Hannah looked at the glass in her hand. He was right. She had picked up his water instead of the empty one beside it. "Sorry," she said. She swapped them. "No problem." He didn't move away immediately. "Long night?" She met his eyes for exactly a beat longer than was necessary. "I'm fine, thank you." "I didn't ask if you were fine. I asked if it was a long night." It was such a small distinction that it almost didn't register. Almost. Hannah looked at him again, more directly this time, the way she usually didn't allow herself to look at guests. He wasn't smiling in the way men smiled at servers when they wanted something. He looked like he had asked a genuine question and was genuinely waiting for an answer. "Yes," she said, "it's a long night. I'm sorry about Marcus." He nodded toward the far end of the room, where the finger-snapping guest had exited 20 minutes earlier. The man has no manners, never has. It's fine. It's not, actually. He said it simply, without drama. But I understand if you don't want to get into it with a stranger. Hannah looked at him for a moment. I need to finish the table. Of course. He stepped back. Have a good night. She went back to clearing the table. She was hyper-aware of him moving toward the door, gathering his jacket from the back of his chair, checking his phone once. She waited for him to leave. He stopped at the door. For what it's worth, the centerpiece with the blue flowers was a good choice. Most people in this room wouldn't have noticed, but whoever arranged them kept the sight lines low so people could actually see each other across the table. It made a difference to the conversation. Hannah paused. That was me, she said. He blinked. You arranged them? The floral vendor was running late. I got here early. The event coordinator was panicking. She shrugged. I just moved them around. For the first time that evening, Landon Mercer smiled. Not the practiced smile she had seen him use on the other guests. Something smaller, more genuine. Well, he said, you have a good eye. He left. Hannah stood alone in the emptying room with her hands full of other people's glasses and her heart doing something strange and uncomfortable in her chest. She set the glasses down. She pressed her palms flat against the white tablecloth and breathed. She had expected to feel many things if she ever found herself in the same room as Landon Mercer. Rage, grief, the specific, airless kind of hatred that keeps you awake at 3 a.m, reconstructing conversations you'll never get to have. She had not expected to feel confused. Hannah Brooks had grown up in a neighborhood in Queens that people from Manhattan described as up and coming for about 15 years without it ever quite arriving. Her father, Daniel Brooks, had worked in financial services for most of his adult life. Not at the glamorous end of the industry, not managing hedge funds or sitting in glass towers, but in the administrative infrastructure that made those towers function. He had been the kind of employee who arrived early and left late and remembered everyone's birthday and trained every new hire with patience and care. He had worked for the same mid-sized financial services firm for 22 years. He was 54 years old when Mercer Capital acquired the firm. Hannah had been 26. She remembered the phone call with the clarity that the brain reserves for moments it knows will matter. She had been at her kitchen table grading student artwork. She was 3 years into her teaching job by then, when her father's number appeared on her screen. She remembered thinking it was unusual for him to call on a weekday evening. He was a man of routine. They're shutting down our division, he said when she picked up. His voice was careful, the way it got when he was trying not to alarm her. Corporate decision. The new owners are consolidating everything. Dad, it's fine. I'll find something else. A pause. I just wanted you to hear it from me. He didn't find something else, not because he didn't try. He sent out applications for 8 months. Hannah knew this because she helped him update his resume, sat with him at the kitchen table on Saturday mornings reformatting documents and researching companies. But 54 in financial services, without the pedigree of a top-tier firm on his resume, was a harder sell than either of them wanted to admit. The interviews came and then stopped coming. The savings eroded. Her parents had to sell the house in Queens and move to a smaller apartment in a less convenient part of the borough. Her mother picked up part-time work at a department store. Her father grew quieter. Her younger brother Marcus was 17 at the time. He had been the kind of teenager who held everything inside and expressed nothing, and who Hannah had always worried about in a low-grade background way that she never quite put into words. Watching their father come undone, slowly, privately, in the way that people who are proud of their self-sufficiency tend to come undone, did something to Marcus that none of them could reverse in time. He started disappearing in the evenings. Hannah's mother made excuses. Hannah tried to talk to him. Her father, too deep in his own collapse by then to reach outward, didn't notice until it was already too late to notice. 3 years after the acquisition, Daniel Brooks went to the garage on a Sunday morning and did not come back. Marcus was the one who found him. Hannah didn't tell this story often. She told it to almost nobody, actually. She kept it in the part of herself that she had sectioned off and sealed the way you seal a room in a house that sustained structural damage. It was still there. She just didn't go in. She functioned. She taught her classes. She ran the community art sessions at the center in Bushwick on Tuesday and Thursday evenings, the free ones she had started 2 years ago for adults who'd never had access to formal art education. She made sure Marcus got to his NA meetings when she could drive him. She paid her rent. She did not think about Landon Mercer on most days, only on the bad ones. The second time she saw him was not planned by either of them, or if it was planned by him, he was considerably better at hiding it than she expected. It was a Thursday evening, 3 weeks after the dinner. Hannah was leaving the community center in Bushwick at 9:45, later than usual because one of her adult students, a man in his 60s who had never held a paintbrush in his life until 8 months ago, had stayed behind to finish a piece he was making for his granddaughter's birthday. She had waited with him, cleaned up around him, and locked up after. She was walking toward the subway, her bag over one shoulder and the strap of a canvas tote full of supply receipts cutting into the other, when a black car slowed alongside her. The window came down. "Miss Brooks?" She stopped walking. She looked at the car. She thought, very clearly, "Of course." Landon Mercer was in the back seat. He looked like he had also had a long evening, his tie loosened, a leather folder open on his knee. "I remember the floral arrangement," he said, "not the name, but the event coordinator mentioned it when I asked." "You asked?" "I was curious." A pause. "Where are you headed?" "Subway." He glanced up through the windshield at the night sky, which had begun producing a light, distinctly unpleasant drizzle while Hannah was inside with her student. "The L is running with delays tonight. Construction. It'll be a 40-minute wait at this hour." She had not checked. She had been busy. She looked at him in the car window with the particular expression she reserved for situations where she suspected she was being maneuvered but couldn't yet prove it. "Are you offering me a ride?" she said. "Or just narrating transit updates?" Something flickered in his eyes. "I'm offering you a ride." "Where are you going?" "Wherever you're going." "That's not how rides work." "It is when you own the car." He said it without any smugness, just factually. "I have nowhere to be tonight. My driver's headed back to the garage. Tell me your address, and I'll drop you off." Hannah looked at him for another moment. It was raining in earnest now. Her canvas tote was not waterproof, and the supply receipts inside it were not replaceable. "Fine," she said, "but I want to stop somewhere first." The somewhere was this community center, a different one, 3 blocks east, where she dropped off a box of donated paint supplies she'd been carrying around all week because she kept forgetting to swing by during their operating hours. It took 8 minutes. When she came back to the car, Landon was standing on the sidewalk in the rain, his jacket over his arm, apparently having gotten out for reasons he didn't explain. "You didn't have to get out," she said. "I know." He opened the car door for her. She got in because the rain was now genuinely unpleasant, and she had already committed to accepting the ride. Not because she was charmed by the door opening. She was not charmed. She reminded herself of this firmly. "What was in the box?" he asked when they were moving. "Art supplies, paint, brushes, some canvas boards. A school nearby had extra stock they were clearing out. The center needed them." "Is that a... Do you do that a lot, sourcing supplies?" "When I can." She looked out the rain-blurred window. "Budgets for community arts programs are basically non-existent. You improvise." A pause. "I drove past that center sometimes," Landon said. "I have a meeting nearby on Thursday evenings. I noticed the lights were always on late." Hannah looked at him. "That's why you were in Bushwick tonight." "I was in Bushwick tonight because I had a meeting." "And you happened to drive past the center." "And I happened to see someone coming out of the center carrying a very heavy-looking tote bag in the rain." He held her gaze for a moment. "I'm not trying to be something I'm not, Ms. Brooks. I noticed you. I'm telling you that plainly." It was disarming precisely because it wasn't smooth. There was no rehearsed line underneath it. He just said it. Hannah turned back to the window. "How do you know my name?" she asked. "You said the event coordinator told you." She did. "And you asked because you rearranged the centerpieces and it made a room full of people who don't like each other actually look at each other across a table." He paused. "And because when I apologized for Marcus, you said, 'It's fine,' in a way that made it extremely clear that you knew it wasn't fine, but you had somewhere better to put your attention." Hannah said nothing. "That's unusual," he said. "In my experience." "In your experience of what?" Of rooms like that one. People in rooms like that one. He looked at her. Most people spend a lot of time performing reactions. You don't seem to. I'm a school teacher, she said. I have 32 nine-year-olds in a room every day. You stopped performing a long time ago. You just deal with what's actually in front of you. He was quiet for a moment. What do you teach them? Art? Do they like it? Some of them. Some of them are furious about it. Some of them think drawing is stupid and spend the whole period trying to convince me that it's stupid. She paused. Those ones are usually the best artists by March. He made a sound that was almost a laugh. Not quite, but almost. They drove in silence for a block or two. It wasn't an uncomfortable silence. Hannah noticed this and wasn't sure what to do with it. You have a daughter, she said. He looked at her, and something in his face changed, not defensively, more like she had pressed gently on a bruise. How do you know that? She hadn't meant to say it. It had come out before she could stop it. She had read about his daughter in an article, one of the pieces about his philanthropic efforts from a year ago, something about a children's hospital wing. She had read it on a bad night, the kind of research you do when grief needs a place to go. I think I read it somewhere, she said. A magazine piece. I'm not sure. He accepted this. Her name is Ellie. She's 6. What's she like? The question surprised him. She could see it. People didn't usually ask him that, she suspected. They asked about his business, his portfolio, his foundation, not about a 6-year-old named Ellie. He stopped. Started again. She's extremely opinionated about sandwiches, like aggressively. She has rules about what can and cannot share a plate. She talks to her stuffed animals as if they have ongoing disputes she has to mediate. A pause. She laughs like her mother did, same exact sound. He went quiet after that. The rain had softened. Hannah watched the streetlights moving past and thought about a 6-year-old girl who talked to stuffed animals, and a father who looked tired in a way that had nothing to do with work, and all the things she had decided about Landon Mercer on the nights when she needed something to be angry at. The car stopped in front of her building. Thank you for the ride, she said. Thank you for the conversation. She got out. She was halfway to her front door before she turned around, though she hadn't planned to. He was still watching through the window. She raised her hand once, not quite a wave. Acknowledgement. Then she went inside. In the elevator, she pressed her back against the wall and stared at the ceiling and breathed. She had expected many things from being near Landon Mercer. Rage, grief, the airless satisfaction of having something to hate. She had not expected to feel anything that required breathing through. She did not go looking for him. That was the part she would think about later, the part she would turn over and examine from different angles on the nights when honesty felt necessary. She did not engineer a third meeting. She did not call the event company and fish for his schedule. She was not that person. She had never been that person. What happened was that her Tuesday class at the center had a guest cancellation, an artist she'd arranged to give a demonstration, who called that morning with a family emergency, and Hannah had 2 hours to fill with 15 adults who had shown up expecting to see someone work in oil paint. She pulled together a session on the fly, put on music, laid out supplies, and spent the 2 hours moving from table to table. It was fine. It was actually good. But she got home late, stopped for groceries, and was in the checkout line at 9:20 with a bag of rice and a box of the particular tea her brother asked her to pick up when someone said her name. She turned. Landon Mercer was standing 2 people behind her in the line, with a basket containing a child's juice boxes, a container of strawberries, and what appeared to be a single sweet potato. They stared at each other for a moment. "This is my neighborhood," she said. "I know." "What are you doing in my neighborhood?" "I live 4 blocks east." He held up the basket, as if it proved something. "I was out of juice." "You live in Bushwick." "I moved here 18 months ago. Ellie's preschool was nearby and I liked—" He stopped. "I liked that it didn't feel like a place that was performing itself." Hannah looked at him for a long moment. "I don't believe you." "You can look it up." She could. She didn't, right there. But later she did, and he was telling the truth. He had bought a brownstone on Linden Street, which was genuinely 4 blocks from her apartment, which was either the world's most committed coincidence or proof that the universe had a specific and unfortunate sense of humor. "Do you want to get coffee?" he said. "There's a place on the corner that's still open. It's 9:30 on a Tuesday." "I know." He looked at her with a kind of careful directness that she was starting to recognize as simply the way he communicated, without cushion, without performance. "I'm asking anyway." Hannah paid for her groceries. She picked up her bag. She stood on the sidewalk outside for a moment while he came through the door behind her, and she thought about all the reasons this was a terrible idea, which were numerous and some of them were serious, and she thought about the look on his face when he had talked about his daughter laughing like her mother. "One coffee," she said, "and I want a real table, not the bar stools." "Done." The coffee place was a small Brazilian cafe that Hannah had been going to for 2 years without knowing the owner's name until about 8 months ago, which said something about how busy she had been for most of those 2 years. The owner, Fernanda, was behind the counter and raised her eyebrows with magnificent subtlety when Hannah walked in with a man she clearly did not recognize from the regular crowd. They sat at a table by the window, which had steamed up from the rain outside. Hannah ordered a cortado. Landon ordered the same thing after reading the menu for 10 seconds in what she suspected was an attempt not to slow them down. "You don't drink coffee," she said. He looked at her. "How do you know that?" "At the dinner, you had sparkling water all night. Everyone else was on their second glass of wine by the main course." He paused. "I don't drink anymore. Haven't in about 4 years." She nodded once. She did not ask why. He seemed to notice this. "You're not going to ask?" "No." "Most people ask." "Most people are trying to figure out if it's gossip-worthy," she said. "I'm not interested in that." He looked at her for a moment. "Why did you agree to get coffee? You clearly weren't sure." "I wasn't sure," she agreed. "I'm still not sure." "Then why?" She thought about the honest answer and how many layers it had, and chose a version of it that was true without being the whole truth. "Because you asked about Ellie," she said, "about what she was like, and you answered like she was a real person, not like she was a detail about yourself." Something moved across his face. Not quite pain, something adjacent to it, like a memory of pain that had been lived with long enough to stop being sharp. "She is a real person," he said. "She's the realest person I know." "How long ago did you lose her mother?" 4 years? "Ellie was 2. Almost 2. She doesn't remember." He turned the small coffee cup in his hands. "Which is maybe better. I'm not sure. I go back and forth on that." "What was she like?" Hannah asked. "Her mother." He looked up. It was clearly not a question he had been asked in a while, either. "Funny," he said, after a moment. "Genuinely funny. Not performed funny. She could make a whole room laugh without raising her voice. She was a landscape architect. She spent most of her career arguing that cities needed to leave room for things to grow without being managed." He paused. "She would have had opinions about Bushwick. Good opinions or bad?" "Complicated ones." The corner of his mouth moved. "She had complicated opinions about most things. It was exhausting, and I miss it every single day." Hannah looked at him across the small table. Outside the window, the rain had stopped. The street was quiet. "I have a brother," she said. It came out before she decided to say it. "He's 23. He's been in and out of recovery for about 4 years." Landon went still. "His name is Marcus," she said. "He's—" She stopped, started again. "He was a sweet kid. He's still a sweet kid, underneath everything. He plays guitar really well, the kind of good that makes you stop what you're doing when you walk past his room. He's funny. He's terrible at waking up before noon. He tries, and then something happens, and he disappears for a while, and then I get a call from a hospital or a police precinct, and we start over." She wrapped her hands around her cup. "I'm the only family he has left." So, Landon said quietly. "So you get up and you start over because what else are you going to do?" A long pause. "I'm sorry," Landon said. It was such a simple thing to say. People said it all the time, and usually it landed like nothing, like a courtesy. But he said it the way he said most things, without decorating it, without following it up with reassurance or advice or any of the other things people added to "I'm sorry" to make themselves more comfortable. He just said it, and let it sit there. Hannah looked out the window. He's actually doing okay right now, she said. 63 days clean. He's been going to meetings consistently. He's staying with me while he gets back on his feet. She paused. I try not to count the days too loudly. Like if I say it out loud too much, I'll jinx it. I understand that feeling, Landon said. She looked at him. What are you superstitious about? He thought about it. Ellie's bedtime, he said. We have a routine. 23 steps, apparently. She counted them once, and now they're sacred. If I skip anything, I'm convinced something bad will happen, which is completely irrational. It's not completely irrational. Tell me why. Routine is how you signal to a child that the world is predictable, Hannah said. After they've experienced something unpredictable, it makes sense that you both take it seriously. He looked at her for a long moment. You're a teacher, he said. I am. No, I mean, you think like one. The way you just explained that. You see the function underneath the behavior. 23 years of being a big sister helps, she said. They sat there for a while longer. Fernanda came by once to ask if they wanted anything else, and Hannah shook her head, and Landon said he was fine, and Fernanda went away looking interested in a way that Hannah would have to address the next time she came in alone. At 10:50, Hannah picked up her bag from the chair beside her. I have to go, she said. I have an early class. Of course. She stood up. He stood up. She had not expected him to stand up. It was a reflex, the kind of thing you don't notice a person doing until they do it. Hannah, he said. She looked at him. I'm aware this is a strange situation, he said. I'm not trying to be something I'm not. I'm just... A pause. He looked for a moment genuinely uncertain. She had not seen him uncertain before. I would like to have this conversation again. She looked at him for a long moment, at the tiredness behind his eyes, at the hands that had turned a coffee cup over and over while he talked about his daughter's laugh. I teach Tuesday and Thursday evenings at the Bushwick Center, she said. I leave at 9:30 most nights. I'm not making you a promise. I'm just telling you where I'll be. She walked out. She walked all the way home in the clear, rain-washed air without looking back, and she thought about the way a man who owned buildings had stood up from a chair when she stood up, and about a 6-year-old who counted bedtime steps to make sure the world stayed in place, and about the many serious reasons why any of this was a mistake. She thought about all of it, and she thought about how long it had been since anyone had asked her what she was superstitious about, and actually waited to hear the answer. Marcus was still awake when she got home. He was on the couch with his guitar, playing something slow and unfinished, stopping and adjusting, the way he had played since he was 16 years old. The apartment smelled like the pasta he had made for himself, and left the rest of it in the fridge with a note on the container that said, "For you, it's the good kind," because he knew she was always going to say she'd eaten when she hadn't. "You're late," he said without looking up. "I know." Good late or bad late? She set her bag down. She went to the fridge. She stood there for a moment looking at the container with the note on it, and she felt the particular kind of love that doesn't have a clean name, the love of a person you have held together with both hands for years, that is mixed up with fear and exhaustion and the specific tenderness of watching someone try. "I don't know yet," she said honestly. Marcus glanced up from the guitar. He looked at her with the quick, assessing look of someone who had grown up watching her face for information. "Huh," he said. He didn't ask anything else. He went back to playing. Hannah made herself eat something, changed into sweatpants, sat on the other end of the couch. The music filled the apartment, imperfect, searching, not quite finished. She didn't think about Landon Mercer again that night. She almost convinced herself of that. He came on a Thursday. Hannah didn't know he would. She had told him where she'd be, and she had told herself that was just information, not an invitation. And for the 11 days between the coffee and that Thursday evening, she had done a reasonable job of believing that. She taught her classes. She helped Marcus with his resume, which he was updating for a barista position at a place on Myrtle Avenue. She graded a set of 6th-grade self-portraits that ranged from genuinely moving to anatomically creative in ways she appreciated more than she could say in her feedback. She did not think about Landon Mercer with any consistency. That was mostly true. At 9:20 on that Thursday, she was in the supply room at the back of the Bushwick Center, washing brushes in the utility sink, when she heard the front door open. The last student had left 10 minutes ago. Fernanda from the cafe sometimes stopped by on Thursday nights to drop off leftover pastries, so Hannah's first thought was pastries, which said something about the state of her dinner that evening. She came out of the supply room with wet hands and a dish towel and found Landon Mercer standing in the middle of the main room, looking at the paintings drying on the wall-mounted drying rack along the north side of the space. He was in a dark jacket, no tie, hands in his pockets. He looked like he had come from something formal and detoured here on the way home. He was studying a painting that one of her students, a 51-year-old former bus driver named Gerald, who had started coming to her sessions after his retirement left him with too many empty hours, had finished 2 weeks ago. It was a landscape, technically imperfect, with a color sense that was entirely Gerald's own. "That one's not for sale," Hannah said. He turned around. "I wasn't going to buy it. Most people who look at things that way are thinking about buying them. I was thinking about how he got that color in the sky." He looked back at the painting. "It's not any single color. It's like 5 things at once." Hannah stood where she was, dish towel in hand, and regarded him. "How do you know it's a he?" "The signature says Gerald." She conceded this with a nod. "He mixes directly on the canvas. Drives me insane to watch because it looks wrong until suddenly it doesn't." "Does he know he's good?" "He thinks he's adequate. I've been arguing with him about that for 6 months. Landon turned from the painting and looked at her. He had that quality again, the one she'd noticed in the coffee shop, of being fully in the room. A lot of people she met were partially somewhere else even when they were standing right in front of you. He wasn't. "I hope I'm not intruding," he said. "You are a little." He accepted that. "Do you want me to leave?" She looked at him for a moment. Her hands were still damp. She finished drying them with the dish towel and set it on the edge of the nearest table. "I have to finish washing brushes," she said. "You can stay if you don't mind the smell of paint thinner." "I don't." He stayed. He didn't follow her into the supply room or hover. He moved through the main room quietly, looking at the other pieces on the drying rack, the student work pinned to the corkboards along the east wall, the shelf of art books with their cracked spines that Hannah had been accumulating from library sales and estate sales for 3 years. She could hear him moving around while she finished the brushes, and the specific silence of a person who knows how to exist in a space without demanding attention. When she came back out, he was standing at the shelf, looking at a book on Romare Bearden. "You have 2 copies of this one," he said. "One is mine. One is for lending." She started switching off the task lights along the work tables, working her way around the room. "I have a library system. Nobody respects it, but it exists." "What's the lending policy?" "Return it. That's the whole policy." She clicked off the 3rd light. "People are pretty good about it, actually. Better than I expected." "What made you start this?" he asked. He said it the way he asked questions, not as small talk, but like he was actually going to do something with the answer. Hannah paused at the 4th light. "I had a student, years ago, when I first started teaching. She was 8 years old and she was extraordinary. Her spatial reasoning, her color instinct, the way she approached problems. I used to save her work to show other teachers because I'd never seen anything like it at that age." She clicked the light off. "Her family moved at the end of the school year. Different borough. I lost track of her." She moved to the 5th light. "I thought about her for years. Whether she ever got to develop it, whether she had a teacher who saw it, whether life just closed around it." She stopped. "I can't help every kid I lose track of, but I can make sure there's a room somewhere with lights on late in case someone walks past and decides to walk in." The room was mostly dark now, lit only by the exit signs and the light from the supply room behind her. Landon hadn't said anything. She looked over and found him watching her with an expression she couldn't fully read. "What?" she said. "Nothing." He shook his head once. "Nothing. That's—" He stopped. "I run a charitable foundation, have for 5 years. Last year, we distributed $68 million. "I know," she said, and then immediately regretted saying it, because she wasn't supposed to know. Not specifically, not like that. He looked at her. "You know." "I read about it. Somewhere." She moved to pick up her bag from the hook by the door, turning her back to him for a moment. It's a well-known foundation. A pause. She could feel him deciding whether to push on that. He didn't. $68 million, he said again, and you just made me feel like we've been doing it wrong. She looked back at him. You probably have been. He made a short sound, not quite a laugh, more like the breath that comes out when someone says something unexpectedly true. How so? Writing checks is easy, she said. I'm not saying it doesn't help, but a check doesn't sit with someone at 10 o'clock on a Tuesday and watch them figure out that the color they've been trying to find has been in front of them the whole time. She pulled on her jacket. Presence isn't something you can fund. You have to actually show up. He was quiet for a moment. Would you be willing to look at what we're doing? The foundation? Give me an honest assessment. She looked at him. Why me? Because you just said in 45 seconds what 5 consultants and 2 board retreats haven't managed to say in 5 years. He held her gaze. And because I think you'd tell me if something was wrong, without softening it. Most people don't actually want that. I know. A pause. I'm asking anyway. Hannah thought about it. She thought about the kinds of resources a foundation with $68 million in annual distribution could direct toward places like this room, if the direction was right. She thought about Gerald and his sky made of 5 colors, and the girl she had lost track of, and the light she kept on late. Send me what you have, she said. Program summaries, grant criteria, whatever your team puts together. I'll read it. I'm not promising anything else. That's enough, he said. She locked up the center, and they walked out into the Bushwick night together. It was warmer than it had been, the city doing that thing it did sometimes in early spring where it relented, just a little, just enough. He walked her to the corner, not to her building, just to the corner, which she noticed, and then said goodnight and went the other direction toward Linden Street. She watched him go for a moment. She didn't mean to, it was just something her eyes did. She went home and found Marcus asleep on the couch with the guitar on the cushion beside him and all the lights on, and she turned off the lights one by one and went to bed and lay in the dark for a while thinking about presence and how it was the thing that cost the most and couldn't be delegated, and that she had been both given and denied at the worst possible moments of her life. She thought about a man who walked someone to the corner instead of the door. She thought about a 6-year-old and 23 steps. She fell asleep later than she meant to. The foundation materials arrived in her email the next morning, attached to a message that read, "These are honest documents. I'm aware they show more comfort with process than with people." L. She read every page over the weekend. She covered them in handwritten notes. On Sunday night, she typed up 3 pages of observations, which she then sat with for 20 minutes before sending because she had been honest to the point that she wasn't sure if it would read as useful or just harsh. She sent it anyway. His response came 40 minutes later. "Can we meet Tuesday? I'd like to bring one of my program directors. Your note about grant timelines alone would justify a board conversation." She wrote back, "Tuesday works, not during business hours. 7 p.m. The coffee place on my corner, Fernandez." He wrote, "I know it." She stared at that for a moment, then she closed her laptop. The meeting on Tuesday was not romantic. It was professional in exactly the way she had intended it to be. His program director was a woman named Sasha Chen, sharp and direct, who had clearly read Hannah's notes carefully and arrived with her own questions that were good ones. They sat at Fernandez for 2.5 hours and talked about grant timelines and community access, and the difference between programs designed for outcomes versus programs designed for optics. Sasha took notes with a mechanical pencil in a small leather notebook. Landon asked questions and didn't talk over either of them when they were working through something. It was the most substantively useful evening Hannah had spent in months that didn't involve a paint set. When Sasha left first, cab already waiting, she shook Hannah's hand and said, "I hope this is the beginning of something." She said it the way a professional says it, meaning the partnership, meaning the foundation work. Hannah understood that. She said, "I hope so too." After Sasha left, Landon stayed long enough for the second round of coffee to get cold. "She liked you," he said. "She liked the notes, which is more useful. She's hard to impress. The notes and you are the same thing, in her assessment." Hannah looked at him. You didn't come to this to talk about the foundation. I came entirely to talk about the foundation. And then Sasha left. He held her gaze for a beat. And then Sasha left. Something shifted in the room slightly. Not dramatically, just the particular shift that happens when two people stop pretending they're only talking about one thing. This isn't simple, Hannah said. She meant it as a practical statement. No. I don't have time for complicated. I know. I have a full-time job, an evening program I run without pay, and a brother in recovery who needs consistency from me right now. I understand that. And you have a 6-year-old and an investment firm, and apparently a foundation that needs significant restructuring. Also apparently true. She looked at her coffee cup. I'm not saying no to anything, she said carefully. I'm saying I don't. I can't be something that gets picked up and put down when it's convenient. I've been that for people before. I know what it looks like from the inside. He was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke again, his voice was different, a degree quieter. My wife and I were together for 6 years before she got sick. 2 of those years I was building the company past a point where I could afford to be present. I thought I was doing it for us. I thought that was how you took care of people. A pause. She never said anything. She was generous like that. But I knew, at the end, I knew exactly how much I'd missed. He looked at the table. I'm not the person I was then. I've spent 4 years trying to become someone Ellie doesn't have to make excuses for. I can't promise I'll always get it right. But I'm not someone who picks things up and puts them down. Hannah sat with that. Tell me something you're bad at, she said. He looked up, surprised by the pivot. Sleeping, he said after a moment. I sleep badly. My mind won't stop processing. I have systems for everything, lists, protocols, contingency plans, and none of them work at 2 a.m. He paused. Patience with people who aren't direct. I've gotten better, but I have to work at it. And I'm bad at... He stopped. I'm bad at asking for help. I recognize when I need it, and then I do 3 other things instead. Why? Because needing help and being someone people depend on don't feel compatible. I know that's irrational. It's not irrational, she said. It's just expensive. He looked at her for a moment. What are you bad at? Letting things be unresolved, she said immediately. I need to understand things. It's useful most of the time and exhausting all of the time. And I push people away when I'm scared and call it giving them space. She turned her cup in her hands. And I'm bad at accepting help from people who haven't earned the right yet, which is probably relevant to this conversation. Probably, he agreed. They looked at each other across the small table with all their stated imperfections sitting between them. And something about that, the plainness of it, the absence of performance, made the air feel cleaner. Okay, Hannah said. Okay. This conversation, again. I'll keep having it. She stood up, pulled on her jacket. Don't make it weird. I can't guarantee that. Try anyway. She walked home in the mild spring evening with her hands in her pockets, and she thought about what she was doing and decided she didn't know, which was unusual enough that she filed it away as information. Marcus was awake this time, sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of tea and a legal pad where he was making a list of something. He looked up when she came in. How was the meeting? Productive. He looked at her face. He had always been perceptive in the way that people who've spent years watching the expressions of the one person they could rely on tend to be. Just the meeting? Don't. I'm not doing anything. You're doing the face. I don't have a face. He looked back at his legal pad. I'm just saying you look like a person who had a productive meeting and then had a slightly different conversation after the productive meeting. Hannah dropped her keys on the hook by the door. 63 days, she said. How are you feeling? The subject change was not subtle. Marcus let it happen. Good, he said. 71, actually. Counted this morning. She stopped, turned around. 71. 71. She looked at him across the kitchen. Her brother with his legal pad and his tea, thin in the shoulders in a way that would take months more to fill back out, with the careful eyes of someone who'd been to the edge of himself and was still navigating back. She felt the specific love again, the one with no clean name. That's really good, Marcus. I know. He didn't make it small. He just said it. I know it is. She made herself a cup of tea and sat across from him and asked what he was making a list of. And it turned out to be songs he wanted to learn, which was new. He'd been writing for so long she'd forgotten he used to love learning other people's music, too. They sat there for an hour, and he played her pieces of 3 different songs, and she told him which parts were her favorites and which parts he was rushing, and he argued with her about one of them and was probably right. It was a good night. She didn't let herself think about Landon Mercer again until after Marcus had gone to bed, and then she allowed herself exactly 15 minutes of it before she turned out the light. She recognized being careful in the way you are careful around something that has the capacity to matter. 17 days later, she met Ellie. It was not planned. That part was important to her later, in the reconstruction of events she did privately, because if it had been staged, she thought she would have felt the staging, and it would have told her something she needed to know. But it was genuinely accidental, the result of a scheduling miscommunication on Landon's end and a supply run on hers. She had been at a hardware store 2 blocks from his brownstone. She needed specific shelf brackets for the center's new storage wall, and the place near her apartment had been out of stock, when her phone showed a text from him. I'm sorry. I completely forgot I have Ellie tonight. I can move our call to tomorrow if that's easier. He had been meeting her every Tuesday at Fernanda's for 3 weeks by then. Sometimes Sasha came. More often, it was just the 2 of them. And the foundation work was real and ongoing and gave them structure and also, she was aware, gave them permission to keep showing up. She had started to look forward to Tuesdays in a way she rationed carefully. She texted back, "It's fine, I'm 2 blocks from you anyway. I was about to head home." A pause. Then, "Do you want to come for dinner?" Ellie made pasta. There is a significant amount of pasta. Hannah stood in the hardware store aisle with her shelf brackets and read that text twice. She knew what this was. This was a door. She could walk through it or not. If she walked through it, things would be different after. Not worse, maybe, but different. She thought about Ellie, who mediated stuffed animal disputes and counted 23 steps. She texted back, "I'll be there in 10 minutes." The brownstone was the kind of Bushwick building that had been quietly, carefully renovated rather than aggressively overhauled. The outside looked like the neighborhood, worn brick and iron railings, and the inside was warm and imperfect in ways that surprised her. Children's drawings were framed on the wall of the hallway going up the stairs. Not organized, not matted to museum standards, just taped and hung and clearly rotated with pencil marks on the frame showing where older ones had been. The kitchen had a child-sized stool at the counter and evidence of recent pasta production scattered across most of the available surface area. Ellie was on the kitchen floor when Hannah came in, not doing anything in particular, just sitting with a collection of small plastic animals arranged around her in what appeared to be a configuration that made sense only from her perspective. She was small, dark-haired, with her father's direct way of looking at things. She looked up at Hannah and didn't say anything for a moment. Just looked. "Your shoes are wet," Ellie said finally. "It was raining." "You should take them off. We have a mat." Hannah took her shoes off and put them on the mat, and Ellie watched this with the satisfaction of someone whose advice has been correctly followed. "I'm Hannah," Hannah said. "I know, Daddy said." "What did Daddy say?" Ellie considered. "That you teach art and you're coming for pasta, and that I should use my manners." She picked up a small plastic elephant. "Do you want to see my elephant?" "Very much." She sat down on the kitchen floor, which was not something she had planned, but Ellie had moved the elephant toward her, and it seemed like the right response. And Landon, who had been at the stove looking like a man who was trying very hard not to appear to be watching what was happening, turned back to the pasta with the slightly too controlled movements of someone managing relief. The elephant's name was Gerald. Hannah looked up at the ceiling for a moment. "Did you name him?" she asked. "Yes." "Why Gerald?" Ellie shrugged with the philosophical indifference of a 6-year-old. "He looks like a Gerald." Hannah thought about the man with the 5-color sky and decided she agreed. "He really does." Dinner was pasta with a sauce that Ellie had helped make, which meant it had slightly more garlic than intended and was extremely good. They sat at the kitchen table, The three of them, and Ellie talked about her week at school with the thoroughgoing narrative detail of someone who considered all information equally important and was therefore unwilling to summarize. There was a conflict involving a red marker and a classmate named Tobias. There were opinions about the cafeteria's new bread. There was an update on an ongoing situation with a bird that had been visiting the classroom window, which Ellie had named Steve. Landon ate his pasta and inserted commentary at appropriate intervals and looked, several times, at Hannah in a way that he didn't try to hide and that she received and didn't deflect. After dinner, Ellie asked Hannah if she wanted to see her drawings. Yes, Hannah said. She meant it. She sat on the edge of Ellie's bed, in a room that was authentically a child's room, lived in and chaotic in the specific way of someone who has pulled every book off the shelf at least once, and Ellie showed her a stack of papers from a drawer with the curatorial seriousness of a museum director. Hannah looked at each one. She did not perform enthusiasm. She said what she actually saw, the way she did with her students. This one has really good proportions, she said, at a drawing that was clearly supposed to be their building. See how you made the door smaller than the windows? Usually people do it the opposite way, but this is actually closer to how it looks. Ellie stared at the drawing. I didn't know I did that. You did it because you looked. That's the whole secret, actually. Most people draw what they think things look like. You drew what you saw. Ellie looked at the drawing for a long moment. Then she looked at Hannah with an expression that was startlingly adult. Can I come to your art class? Hannah smiled. You'd have to ask your dad. He says yes to things if you ask at breakfast. From the doorway, where Landon had appeared at some point, came a sound that was very clearly a suppressed laugh. Hannah looked at him over Ellie's head. He looked back, and his face, in that moment, not performing anything, not managing anything, just a man standing in his daughter's doorway while his daughter showed someone her drawings, looked like the least tired she had seen it. It lasted only a moment. Ellie demanded the next drawing be assessed. Hannah assessed it. The moment passed, but she carried it home with her that night on the subway, tucked somewhere she didn't examine too closely. The image of a man standing in a doorway finally, briefly, looking like he'd put something down. She got home and Marcus was awake, and she told him she'd had dinner with a friend, which was almost the truth and also wildly insufficient as a description of the evening, and Marcus looked at her and said nothing and went back to his guitar. She lay in bed that night thinking about Gerald the elephant, and 23 steps, and a little girl who paid attention to doors. She thought about all the ways a person could be known without being asked. She thought about Landon Mercer's face in that doorway. Then she turned on her side and went to sleep. She had, she understood, stopped being careful approximately 2 hours ago. She hadn't noticed it happening, which meant it had been happening for longer than that. She stayed with that fact in the dark for a moment. Then she let it be what it was. 6 weeks. That was how long it took for things to shift from something Hannah could describe to something she couldn't. 6 weeks of Tuesday evenings at Fernanda's that started at 7 and ended closer to 10. 6 weeks of texts about the foundation work that occasionally drifted into other territory. A photograph Landon sent of a grant report so poorly written it read like satire. A voice memo Hannah left him at 11 p.m. about a community partnership model she'd been reading about. An exchange at 1:30 in the morning that started with him asking if she was awake and ended 40 minutes later with them having argued, productively and without resolution, about whether institutional charity was structurally incapable of genuine impact or just habitually lazy. 6 weeks of Ellie asking, every time Hannah came for dinner, whether she could show her something new. It was the Ellie part that got her. She could manage the rest. She had managed complicated feelings before, and she knew how to keep them at a functional distance when necessary. But Ellie had no distance. Ellie was 6 years old and operated entirely in the present tense, and the present tense for Ellie now included Hannah as a fact of her environment, the way the elephant named Gerald was a fact, and the 23 steps were a fact, and the stool at the kitchen counter was a fact. Hannah did not know what to do with being someone's fact. She was thinking about this on a Friday afternoon in late April, sitting at her classroom desk after the kids had gone, grading the last of a set of watercolor assignments, when her phone rang. She expected Marcus. He called on Friday afternoon sometimes, from his NA meeting location, just to check in, but the number on the screen was one she didn't recognize. She almost didn't answer. She was tired. It had been a long week and she still had 40 minutes of grading ahead of her, and then 2 hours at the center, and then the subway home. She answered, "Is this Hannah Brooks?" A man's voice, careful and professional in a way that immediately made her stomach tighten. Speaking. "Ms. Brooks, my name is Dr. Renard. I'm calling from Lenox Hill Hospital. I have a Marcus Brooks listed as a contact." She was already standing. Her chair scraped back. The grating fell off the desk. "What happened?" "He's stable," Dr. Renard said immediately, the way they learn to say it fast because the alternative is someone collapsing on the other end of the line. "He's stable and conscious. He came in approximately 2 hours ago. There was an incident." "I'll be there in 20 minutes. She was there in 17. Marcus was in a curtained bay in the emergency department, hooked to a monitor, looking smaller than she had ever seen him look. He was conscious. Dr. Renard had not lied about that. But his eyes, when they found hers across the room, had the particular quality of someone who had been somewhere very dark and recently returned and was not yet sure what to do with the light. She sat down beside him and took his hand and did not say anything for a long moment. 79 days, he said. His voice was rough. She understood what he meant. He had made it to 79 days before this. She did the math without meaning to. "I'm not mad," she said. "You should be." "Marcus, I was doing okay." He turned his face away. "I was actually doing okay, and I don't even know why. Someone at the meeting, after, and I thought I was past the part where one could—" He stopped. "I wasn't past it." "No," she said. "You weren't." She stayed with him while they ran their assessments and spoke to the crisis counselor and made their referrals. She stayed because there was no one else to stay, which was not a new situation but was newly exhausting in a way she felt all the way into her back teeth. She called the school to arrange a sub for Monday in case she needed it. She texted the center to cancel Tuesday's session. She sat in a plastic chair in a fluorescent-lit hallway and dealt with the logistics of her brother's crisis the way she had learned to deal with them, methodically, without stopping long enough to feel everything, because if she stopped to feel everything, she wouldn't be able to keep moving. She called Landon at 8:30 that night from the hospital cafeteria. She had not planned to. She had been sitting with a cup of coffee, she wasn't drinking, staring at a vending machine when her phone was in her hand and his name was on the screen. He picked up on the second ring. "Hannah." Marcus relapsed. She said it plainly, the way she had learned to say hard things, without wind-up, without softening, because the softening always made it harder. "He's at Lenox Hill. He's stable. I'm going to be unavailable for a few days while I sort this out." A brief pause. "Are you at the hospital now?" "Cafeteria." "Have you eaten anything?" The question was so practical and so unexpected that she felt something crack, slightly, somewhere in the vicinity of her chest. "I had a granola bar." "I'm coming." "Landon, you don't have to." "I'm already looking up the parking." She could hear him moving in the background. "Is Ellie okay with her sitter for tonight?" "I don't need—" "Hannah." His voice was quiet but not soft. "Let me come." She sat in the plastic cafeteria chair with the untouched coffee in front of her, and the fluorescent light overhead, and the particular exhaustion of someone who had been holding everything together by themselves for so long that the offer of a second set of hands felt almost threatening in its foreignness. She pressed her free hand flat on the table. "Okay," she said. He arrived 40 minutes later with a sandwich from a place 2 blocks from the hospital and 2 better cups of coffee in a carrier and absolutely no fanfare. He sat down across from her at the cafeteria table, slid the sandwich toward her, and said, "How is he?" She told him. All of it the way it actually was, not the version she would tell a colleague or a casual friend, but the version with the texture of it intact. The 79 days and what that number meant. The way Marcus had looked when she walked in. The counselor's assessment and the waiting list for the inpatient program Marcus's insurance covered, and the other program she'd been researching for the past hour on her phone that had better outcomes and a 2-week entry window and cost more than she had. Landon listened. He didn't interrupt. He didn't offer solutions while she was still describing the problem, which was something she noticed because it was rarer than it should have been. When she finished, he said, "Tell me about the second program." "It's private, residential, 60 days. The structure is much more intensive, and the counseling model is actually designed for—" "How much?" She looked at him. "That's not why I'm telling you this." "I know it's not." He held her gaze. "How much?" She told him. She watched him do the mental calculation that took him approximately no time at all, given what he was worth. "I'll cover it," he said. "No." "Hannah," I said no. She felt the familiar steel come into her voice, the one that appeared when the territory of her autonomy was approached without invitation. "I'm not a charity case. Marcus isn't a charity case. I'll figure out the financing." "I know you will." He was very calm, not the calmness of condescension, but the kind that came from being genuinely untroubled by her pushback. "But you'll figure it out in 3 weeks because that's how long applications and payment plans take, and the entry window is 2 weeks. She stared at him. He held her look. "I'm not offering charity. I'm offering a loan. I want it in writing, actual terms, actual repayment schedule, whatever you want. But the window is 2 weeks and your brother is down the hall, so let me help." The fluorescent light hummed above them. From somewhere in the hospital, someone was laughing. Real laughter, sudden and incongruous, the way laughter in hospitals always sounds. "I'll pay you back," she said. "Every dollar." "I know. I need a real agreement, not just your word. I'll have my attorney draw up whatever you want by Monday morning." She looked at him for a long moment, at the coffee he had brought and the sandwich he had eaten half of, without noticing, and the face of a man who was sitting in a hospital cafeteria at 9:30 on a Friday night because she had said, "Okay." "Why are you here?" she asked. Not accusatory, genuinely asking. He looked at her and seemed to consider the various available answers. "Because 4 years ago, when my wife died, I sat in a hospital hallway by myself for 6 hours because I had told everyone I was fine, and it didn't occur to me until I was sitting there that I should have said something different." He set his coffee down. "I didn't want you to be in that cafeteria alone." Hannah looked at the table. She pressed her lips together. "Thank you," she said. It came out rough. She hadn't cried yet. She wouldn't. Not tonight. She had too much still to do. But it was somewhere close. "Don't thank me." He shook his head. "Just eat the rest of the sandwich." She ate the rest of the sandwich. Marcus was discharged the next day into her custody pending the intake process for the program, which moved quickly once the financial piece was resolved. True to his word, Landon had the loan agreement to her by Monday morning. Legitimate terms, a repayment timeline that was generous without being insulting, his attorney's contact information in the footer. Hannah read it twice, had her own attorney, a woman from her neighborhood who did pro bono work for community organizations and owed Hannah several favors, review it, and signed it. The 2 weeks before Marcus's program intake were hard in the particular way of waiting. He was clean in the immediate sense, but fragile in a way that required presence. Hannah adjusted her schedule. She taught her day classes and came home. She didn't go to the center on Tuesday. She cooked dinners, they ate together and watched bad television and let Marcus play guitar for her while she did the foundation work Landon kept sending her, which had expanded now into a full redesigned proposal that Sasha was building out with Hannah's input. Landon came on a Sunday afternoon, 2 days before the intake date, because Ellie had made something for Marcus and insisted on delivering it personally. The something turned out to be a drawing of a person playing guitar under a large tree, with a yellow sky and 3 birds of indeterminate species labeled in Ellie's careful 6-year-old printing for Marcus Get Better. Love, Ellie. Marcus held the drawing and looked at it for a long time without saying anything. "She made it herself?" he asked finally. "Every bit," Landon said. "I offered to help with the birds. She declined." "The birds are great." "I'll tell her you said that. She'll be extremely pleased." Marcus looked at the drawing for another moment. He was sitting on Hannah's couch in the apartment he had spent weeks in now, thinner still but steady in the eyes. He looked up at Landon with a directness that was pure Marcus, the thing about her brother that had always been both his difficulty and his gift. "You're paying for the program," Marcus said. "Marcus," Hannah started. "It's okay," Marcus said without looking away from Landon. I'm not mad about it. I just want to know why. Landon seemed to consider how to answer. He chose honesty the way Hannah had noticed he consistently chose it, even when it would have been easier not to. Because I could, and because your sister has too much pride to let me do it as a gift, so we made it a loan, which is what it is. And what do you want from her? Marcus. Hannah's voice went firm. I'm asking directly. Marcus's eyes didn't move from Landon. I think that's fair. It is fair, Landon agreed. He met Marcus's gaze. I want to keep having dinner on Thursdays, and I want your sister to stop pretending she's only here to help redesign my foundation's grant portfolio, because I think she knows that hasn't been the whole story for a while, and I think she's running out of reasons to pretend otherwise. He paused. That's what I want. No strings attached to the loan. A silence. Marcus looked at his sister. Hannah was looking at Landon. Okay, Marcus said, and looked back at the drawing. The birds really are great. The intake day was a Wednesday. Hannah drove Marcus to the facility herself, a residential program in a converted house in New Jersey, 40 minutes over the bridge in morning traffic. She had packed his bag with him the night before, the way she used to pack for school trips when he was a kid, checking and rechecking that he had everything. He submitted to this with patience. In the car, they didn't talk much. Marcus had his guitar on his knee, which the facility allowed in the personal items, and he played small fragments of things at the stops. Hannah drove and let him. At the facility entrance, she helped carry his bag to the intake desk. She filled out the parts he needed her help with. She met the intake coordinator, who was warm in a professional way, the real kind of warmth, not the performed kind. And then there was a moment, after everything was signed and Marcus's room assignment had been given, where they stood in the front hallway, and it was almost time. He was the one who hugged her. She had been trying to calculate whether it would make things harder, and he made the decision for her by pulling her in, sudden and tight, the way he'd hugged her when he was a teenager and the world had gotten temporarily too large for him to manage. She held on. 79 days was real, she said into his shoulder. I know. You'll get back there. I know. He let go. His eyes were clear. Take care of yourself while I'm gone. Don't just work. Hannah. He gave her the look, the one siblings save for the exact moments when the other person is about to lie convincingly. Don't just work. She drove back to Brooklyn with the windows down and the music off, and the morning spreading itself across the bridge in the particular way of late April, messy and bright and not quite warm enough yet, promising something that hadn't arrived. She thought about her father. She thought about him more on days like this, when the logistics were handled and the crisis had a shape, and there was space in the forward motion for the things she usually kept moving too fast to feel. Daniel Brooks, who had been steady and present for 26 years of her life, and whose steadiness she had imported so completely into herself that sometimes she forgot it hadn't always been hers. Who had trained every new hire with patience and lost the thing he'd given his adult life to, and gone quiet in a way she hadn't understood in time. She had been angry at him, briefly, at the very beginning. It was the kind of anger that came from love and fear and the unbearable specificity of loss, and it had burned out fast and left behind something she had no name for. Not grief exactly, more like a permanent adjustment in the way she understood the weight of things, how much invisible weight a person could be carrying, how little of it showed on the surface. She had been 29 when he died. Marcus had been 17. The math of what that did to a 17-year-old who already held everything inside was not complicated, and she had lived inside that math for 3 years already, by the time she walked into a dinner service on the 43rd floor of a midtown hotel and recognized a name on a guest list. She had not told Landon any of this. She had not told him because she could not find a way to tell it that wasn't also an accusation, and she did not know if it was an accusation, and she was not sure what she wanted from the telling. She had been circling it for weeks in the privacy of her own thoughts, picking it up and setting it down, and it sat in her chest like something that needed to be moved, but that she could not yet determine the right place for. She did not tell him that afternoon, when she called to let him know Marcus was settled. She did not tell him that Thursday at dinner, when Ellie showed her a new drawing and Landon made a pasta entirely different from the previous pasta, and they talked about the Foundation's new community partnership framework until 10 p.m. She did not tell him on the Saturday when he took her and Ellie to a botanical garden in Staten Island, because Ellie had developed an interest in plants that Landon attributed to a book series, and Hannah suspected was partly an interest in having somewhere to walk for a long time on weekends. She did not tell him, and every day she didn't tell him, the thing got heavier. The first time she almost told him was a Saturday evening in mid-May. They were in his kitchen after Ellie had gone to bed, the 23 steps completed, the stuffed animals arranged in their correct configuration, a glass of water on the nightstand because that was step 18, and they were drinking tea because Landon had tea now, a specific brand she'd mentioned once, and he had bought it and put it in the cabinet next to his coffee without making anything of it. She had been reading a document on her laptop, and he had been reviewing something for work, and they had been sitting in comfortable parallel for an hour in a way that should have required more time between two people to arrive at, but had apparently not. And then he looked up and said, "You're somewhere else tonight. I'm right here." "Your body is. Your head's been somewhere else since you got here." She looked at him. She thought about it, picking the thing up again, turning it over, looking for the right entry point. "My father worked in financial services," she said, "for 22 years, at the same firm." Landon was still. He had good instincts about stillness, she had noticed. He didn't fill silence unnecessarily. "He was 54 when the firm was acquired," she said, "by a larger company. The acquiring company eliminated his division." She heard the shift in his breathing, barely perceptible. But there. "Hannah, I'm not done." She kept her voice level. She had been a teacher for 7 years. She could be level when she needed to be. "He couldn't find another position. The savings ran out. They had to sell the house. He got very quiet." She looked at her hands. "Marcus was 17. He watched our father come apart slowly, and he didn't have the tools for it, and none of us saw what it was doing to him in time." She paused. 3 years after the acquisition, my father died, by his own hand, in the garage. Marcus was the one who found him. The kitchen was very quiet. "The company that acquired his firm," she said, "was a mid-size financial services group called Alderton Partners." She looked up at Landon. "Mercer Capital purchased Alderton Partners in the spring of that year. Your company, your acquisition." The color had left Landon's face. She watched him take it in, watched the thing land in him, the full weight of it, not the business abstraction of an acquisition, but the specific human architecture of what that decision had built downstream. A man who went quiet, a teenager who found him, a daughter who had been managing the wreckage for 6 years. "I knew your name," she said, "the night of the dinner. I recognized it from the paperwork. I had looked it up years ago when I was trying to understand what had happened. I knew exactly who you were when you walked over to correct my glassware." He hadn't moved. He was looking at her with an expression she couldn't fully categorize. Devastation, yes, and something more complex beneath it. The look of a person being forced to see the full shape of something they had kept abstract. "Why didn't you—" He stopped, started again. "Why did you stay? At the dinner?" "All of it. The coffee, the meetings, dinner, all of it." She considered how to answer that honestly. "At first I wanted to understand you. I had spent years with a shape of you in my head, a name on paperwork, a face in a magazine, something I could put the anger on. I wanted to see if the real person matched the shape." She set her laptop aside. "And then you talked about Ellie. And then I read about what you were trying to do with the foundation, and the person in front of me kept being different from the shape." She looked at him steadily. "I didn't know what to do with that. Hannah," his voice was rough. "I'm not telling you this to hurt you," she said. "I'm telling you because I have been not telling you for months, and it's been eating me from the inside. And because I don't know how to be in this—" She gestured between them, vaguely, at whatever this was. "And also be carrying something this big. I'm not capable of both." The silence stretched between them. Outside, a car passed. Somewhere in the house, a clock made a small sound. "I didn't know about your father," Landon said. His voice was careful the way a person is careful when they are trying not to let the full force of something out too fast. I know that doesn't help, but I need to say it. I did not know the human cost of that acquisition. Any of those acquisitions. I knew numbers, and I knew synergies, and I knew what my analyst told me about operational overlap, and I did not—" He stopped. His jaw was tight. I did not know that behind one of those numbers was a man with 22 years in and a daughter who taught kids to paint and a son who played guitar. Hannah was looking at him. I can't undo it, he said. I know I can't. I'm not going to insult you by... He shook his head. There's nothing I can say that makes this better. I know that. I know you know that. Are you... He looked at her. Hannah, are you telling me this to end it? She sat with the question. It was the right question. She had been sitting with it herself for weeks, had turned it over and examined it from different angles, had tried to determine what the honest answer was. No, she said. I don't think I am. Then what do you need from me? She thought about that for a long time, long enough that the silence began to feel less like tension and more like two people taking up appropriate space around a serious question. I need you to actually understand it, she said finally. Not apologize for it, not fix it with money, which is your first instinct with everything painful, and I understand why, but I need you to not do that here. I need you to sit with what it actually means, that a decision made in a boardroom made its way down through years and people and arrived at a 17-year-old boy in a garage. Her voice remained steady. She kept it that way on purpose. I need you to know that I know about all the other families inside those numbers, not just mine. He looked at her for a long moment. His eyes were very dark and very clear, and she could see him receiving what she'd said, not deflecting it, not building a defense around it, just receiving it the way you receive something that has weight. I understand, he said. I understand what you're saying. She nodded. Neither of them moved for a moment. I don't know where to go from here, he said. Neither do I. Are you going to go home? She thought about it, about the apartment 4 blocks away and the quiet of it without Marcus and the long night ahead. She thought about all the times in the past few months she had driven herself home from this kitchen and lain in the dark thinking about something she'd said or something he'd said or the specific quality of an evening she couldn't quite let go of. I don't know yet, she said. He nodded. He reached across the table and set his hand over hers, not gripping, not pulling, just present. The same quality she had noticed about him from the beginning, just there. She turned her hand over and let him hold it. They sat like that for a long time in his kitchen, with the tea going cold and the document unfinished, and all the complicated weight of the thing between them out in the open now, where it could be seen. She did not go home, not immediately. She sat in that kitchen with her hand in his until past midnight, talking. Not about the foundation, not about logistics, not about anything that required management. About her father, about the specific way he used to laugh at his own jokes, always a beat before the punchline. About the house in Queens and the kitchen table where they had spent Saturday mornings working on a resume that was never going to be enough. About Marcus at 9 years old, learning the opening chords of a song their father had taught him. Landon listened. He asked questions that were the right questions. He did not offer solutions or silver linings or any of the things people offered to make grief more manageable, because he understood that grief wasn't meant to be managed. It was meant to be witnessed. At 12:40, she picked up her bag. I'll walk you to the corner, he said. You always walk me to the corner. I know. They walked out into the May night, which was finally genuinely warm, the city smelling of rain and something green, and the particular aliveness of late spring. At the corner of Linden, they stopped. She looked at him in the streetlight. He looked back. I'm glad you told me, he said. I'm not sure what happens next, she said. Neither am I. He held her gaze. But I'm not going anywhere. She looked at him for another moment. Then she nodded, once, and turned to walk the 4 blocks home. She made it half a block before she heard him say her name. She turned around. He was still standing at the corner, hands in his pockets, watching her. 79 days was real, he said. For Marcus. She understood what he was doing, giving it back to her. Yeah, she said. It was. She walked home. She walked home and let herself into the apartment and stood in the kitchen that was too quiet without Marcus, and she pressed her palms flat on the counter and breathed. She had told him. It was out now, in the space between them, real and irreversible. She did not know what it would do to them. She only knew that carrying it alone had cost her more than she could keep paying, and that a man had stood at a corner in the middle of the night and given her words back to her like they were something worth keeping. She breathed. She stayed with what was real. He did not call the next day. Hannah had not expected him to. Or she had told herself she hadn't expected him to, which was a different thing. She spent the morning grading and the afternoon at the center prepping for the following week's sessions, and she kept her phone face down on the work table the way she did when she needed to not be watching it. She was reasonably successful at this. She checked it twice in 3 hours, which she considered a personal achievement given the circumstances. The silence wasn't alarming. She understood it. She had handed him something enormous the night before, and she had not handed it to him gently. She had handed it to him plainly, the way she did most things, without wrapping it in qualifications or softening the edges. A man whose business decision had contributed to the conditions that killed her father. A man she had recognized and said nothing to for months. A man who was now, somehow, the person she called from hospital cafeterias at 8:30 on Friday nights. She understood that he needed to sit with it. She needed to sit with it too. What she hadn't anticipated was that the sitting would feel like this. Not peaceful, not resolved, not even particularly painful, just fundamentally unfinished, like a sentence with no period. He called on the second day, Sunday evening, while she was on the couch with a bowl of cereal she was eating for dinner because she had not managed to cook anything, and the cereal was there. "I need to tell you something," he said. "Okay." "I spent yesterday going through the Alderton acquisition file, the whole thing. Documentation I hadn't looked at in 6 years. His voice was careful and tired in equal measure. There were 914 employees in the divisions we eliminated. I knew that number in the abstract when we made the decision. 914 was a figure in a restructuring analysis. It had a dollar amount next to it, and a timeline, and a projected savings number. A pause. "I read the names yesterday. All of them. It took 4 hours. Hannah set her cereal down. "Your father's name is in that file," Landon said. "Daniel Brooks, employee ID, hire date, department. 22 years of service noted in the HR record." His voice had something in it she hadn't heard before. Not quite grief, more like the specific sick feeling of understanding something you can't unknow. "I saw his name, and I thought about what you told me. About the Saturday mornings at the kitchen table. About Marcus learning guitar chords." He stopped. "I don't have anything useful to say about that. I just needed you to know that I read his name. That he's not a number to me anymore." Hannah sat very still on her couch. "I'm not telling you this to ask for something," Landon continued. "I'm not asking for absolution or... I'm not asking for anything. I know the difference between what can be repaired and what can't. I just needed to tell you that I looked." She let the silence sit for a moment. "Why did you look?" "Because you asked me to understand it. Not apologize for it. Not fix it." He paused. "Reading 914 names is the closest thing to understanding it that I know how to do." She pressed the back of her hand against her mouth for a moment. Not crying, just needing the pressure. "Thank you," she said. It came out quieter than she intended. "I want to change how we make decisions," he said, "at Mercer Capital. Not just the foundation, the actual investment firm. I've been thinking about it for weeks, since the conversations we've been having about the foundation work, but yesterday made it clearer. I want an employee impact review built into every major acquisition process. Real names, real timelines, real consequences assessed before we sign anything." A pause. "I know that sounds like I'm trying to buy something." "It sounds like something you need to do regardless of what it sounds like," Hannah said. "Yeah," he said. "Yeah, it does." They stayed on the phone for another hour, not resolving anything, not drawing conclusions, just talking, which was what they seemed to do when things were serious. Not toward a solution, but alongside the problem, inhabiting it together until it had a more livable shape. Before they hung up, he said, "Can I see you Thursday?" "Yes," she said, without hesitation that surprised even her. "Dinner. Not the center. I'll cook." "You always cook." "Because you don't eat dinner before you come. Don't argue with me about this." She didn't argue with him about it. Thursday was quiet and domestic and improbably comfortable given everything that was sitting between them unresolved. Ellie was in a phase of needing to show Hannah every picture she'd drawn since Tuesday, which was 7 pictures. And Hannah looked at each one with genuine attention while Landon moved around the kitchen and the apartment filled with the smell of something with garlic and herbs that she had started to associate, in the private architecture of her own responses, with coming in from the cold. They ate. Ellie talked about Steve the classroom bird, who had apparently brought a friend. She called the friend Steve too, on the grounds that Steve would want a friend with a familiar name. Landon and Hannah did not look at each other during this explanation because they were both clearly on the edge of laughing, and Ellie was entirely serious. After Ellie was in bed, 23 steps, the glass of water, the stuffed animals in their correct positions, Hannah was washing the dishes because she had established early that this was her contribution since she couldn't cook reliably. And Landon was drying, and they were doing it in the easy silence of people who have found a rhythm, when he said, "The board wants to move on a new acquisition." She kept washing. "What kind?" "Logistics company, mid-size, about 600 employees." He dried a pot with deliberate care. "I told them I needed 60 days to build out an employee impact review before we proceeded. They think I've lost my mind." "Have you?" "Probably." He set the pot down. "Sasha thinks it's the right move. She said—" He paused, and she could hear something complicated in it. "She said it should have been standard practice years ago. She wasn't unkind about it, but she wasn't wrong either." "No," Hannah said. "She wasn't." "The board is going to push back. Hardest from a guy named Whitfield, who's been on the board for 12 years and whose primary position is that anything that slows the acquisition process is a liability." He looked at the dish in his hand. "He's going to call it sentimentality. He's going to say that my judgment is being compromised by personal involvement with—" He stopped. "With me," Hannah said. "Yes." She rinsed the last pan, shut off the water, dried her hands on the dish towel hanging from the oven handle. "Is it?" He looked at her. "Is my judgment being compromised?" "Is it?" He considered it genuinely, which was what she needed him to do. Not reflexively deny it, not reassure her, actually think about it. "No," he said finally. "You clarified something I should have seen years ago. That's different from compromise." A pause. "But Whitfield will say there's no difference." "What are you going to do?" "Build the framework anyway. Document it thoroughly. Present it to the board as a risk management tool because that's actually what it is. An undisclosed liability in any acquisition is a risk, and human cost that hasn't been assessed is an undisclosed liability." He set down the dish he was holding. "I'm going to do it because it's right. I'm also going to do it in language Whitfield can't dismiss because I've learned something from watching you." "What have you learned from watching me?" "That you don't argue values with people who don't share your values. You argue function. You argue structure. You give people the version of the truth they can receive, and you let them arrive at the rest themselves." He looked at her. "You do it in your classroom. You do it with the foundation work. You did it the night you told me about your father. You gave it to me in the most precise language possible and let me sit with what it meant." Hannah looked at him for a moment. "That's a very charitable reading of what I did." "It's an accurate one." "I was also just saying what was true because I didn't have the energy to be strategic about it." "Those aren't mutually exclusive." She leaned back against the counter. The kitchen was clean, Ellie was asleep, the city was doing its late-night ambient hum outside the window. She felt in that moment the particular quality of an evening she would remember. Not because anything dramatic was happening, but because of the specific texture of ordinariness in a life that had been short on it for a long time. "I want to talk about the foundation redesign," she said. "The full scope. I have ideas I haven't brought to Sasha yet because I wasn't sure if they were too—" She searched for the word. "Too what?" "Ambitious. In a way that requires more than funding. It would require fundamental restructuring of how the programs are delivered." She crossed her arms. "I want to build something, not just consult on something. An actual institution, with a physical home and full-time staff and programs that compound. Arts, workforce training, counseling, mentorship, all under one roof, specifically designed for kids and families that the system has marked as low priority. Not a Band-Aid. A place." Landon looked at her for a long moment. "Where?" Here, Brooklyn. Somewhere accessible. It would need to serve multiple boroughs, so transit access matters. She paused. I know what this costs. I know it's not. Tell me the full vision, he said. Don't pre-edit for cost. So she told him. She told him all of it. The program she had designed in her head over years of running the center on a shoestring budget, the model she had researched from 3 similar institutions in other cities, the staffing structure, the intake process that didn't require families to navigate 17 different agency referrals, the space requirements, the partnership possibilities with the public school system. She talked for 40 minutes. She was sitting on his kitchen counter by the end of it, which she had not planned, and he was at the table with his laptop open, typing, which he had started doing 20 minutes in without asking permission because she was clearly not done and he needed somewhere to put the information. When she finished, he looked up from the laptop. The name, he said. She looked at him. What would you call it? She had not let herself think this far. It felt like counting something she hadn't earned yet. She looked at the window, the dark and lit city beyond it. I don't know yet, she said. Okay. He closed the laptop. We'll figure that out later. She looked at him. You're serious? I've been serious since you sent me 3 pages of foundation notes at 11 p.m. on a Saturday. He held her gaze. I just needed to know if you were serious. I'm serious. Then let's build it. She stayed too late that night, past midnight, sitting at his kitchen table while they mapped the broad structure of something that didn't exist yet, pulling up real estate listings for available commercial space in Brooklyn and Queens, arguing about square footage and program sequencing and whether the workforce training component should be integrated from intake or introduced at a later stage. It was the kind of argument she liked, substantive, neither of them giving ground without reason, both of them ending up somewhere different from where they started. When she finally stood to go, the city outside was quiet in the way it got between 2 and 3 a.m., not silent but lower, breathing differently. He walked her to the corner. He always walked her to the corner, and she had stopped noting it as a detail and started receiving it as simply what happened when she left his house, the way you stop noticing that someone always makes sure you have coffee before they start talking. At the corner of Linden Street, they stopped. She turned to say goodnight and found him closer than usual. Not dramatically, not in a way that announced itself, just slightly closer, the small geographic adjustment of someone who has made a decision. Hannah, he said. She looked at him. He kissed her. It was not cinematic. His aim was slightly off at first, and she moved to correct it, and neither of them said anything about that. And it was brief, and when it was over, they stood in the 2 a.m. quiet of their street, and she could feel her own heartbeat in a way that was inconveniently obvious. Okay, she said. Okay, he agreed. She walked home. She walked home in the dark and went inside and stood in her kitchen and thought about the fact that she had known his name before he said it, had carried a version of him as a target for years, had sat in a hospital cafeteria and called him without quite deciding to, had told him the hardest thing she knew how to say and watched him drive 4 hours reading names on a Sunday instead of looking away. She thought about all of it, and she stayed with all of it, and she did not try to resolve the parts that weren't yet resolvable. She just let it be true. The board meeting happened on a Thursday morning 3 weeks later. Landon presented the Employee Impact Review Framework to 12 people in a room she had heard him describe but never seen. He sent her a text at 8:47 a.m. that said simply, "Going in." She was in the middle of a 6th grade class and she had her phone in her desk drawer and she did not check it until 11:15 between periods when she found 3 messages. Whitfield said what I expected. Sasha backed the framework with data I hadn't even seen yet. She's been building the case for a month. It passed. 7-5. It'll be standard practice on every acquisition going forward. She read the messages standing in the hallway between her classroom and the supply closet, students flowing around her in both directions. She typed back, 7-5 is a win. He wrote, Sasha says it's a mandate. She almost smiled in the hallway. She put her phone back in her pocket and went back to her classroom. That evening, the first concrete conversation about the institution happened with Sasha present at Fernanda's over a spread of documents that covered the table entirely and caused Fernanda to raise an eyebrow when she came to take their order. They had a name for it by 10 p.m. Not because they'd been searching for one, but because Sasha had said something offhand about how every institution named after a donor was an institution that announced its priorities in the wrong direction, that the name should say something about what it was for. And Hannah had said, without thinking, that it should be named for the people it was meant to find, the ones who'd been passed over, written off, looked through. "The Brooks Center," Sasha said. Hannah looked up. "Your name," Sasha said. "Not because of the loan, because you built the concept." She glanced at Landon. "And because the people it's meant to serve deserve to know it was built by someone who came from where they come from." Hannah looked at the table. "Hannah," Landon said, quietly. "We'd need to do the legal structure first," she said. "Obviously," Sasha said, "and the site selection is going to take time if we want the right location." "We have time," Landon said. "I want full programmatic autonomy. If this has my name on it, I need to be the one making decisions about how the programs run, not Hannah." Landon's voice was patient. "We know." She looked up. Both of them were watching her with the particular expression of people who have already decided something and are waiting for the other person to catch up. "Okay," she said. "Okay," Sasha said. "Okay." She looked at the documents spread across the table, the programmatic sketches, the staffing models, the square footage estimates, the partnership frameworks, all the pieces of something that didn't exist yet but would. "Let's build it right." Marcus called on a Wednesday evening, 5 weeks into the program. Hannah was at the center, finishing up when his name appeared on her screen. She answered immediately, the way she always answered his calls, with the specific alertness of someone who had been trained by experience to read tone in the first 3 seconds. "Hey," he said. The hey was okay. She let out a breath she'd been holding since the phone lit up. "Hey, how are you?" "Good." A pause. "Actually good. Not just saying it." "Okay. I've been talking to a counselor here. Like actually talking, not the version where you say enough to satisfy them and move on." Another pause. "She asked me to draw something as part of a session. I didn't tell her about you, but I drew Dad at the kitchen table." Hannah sat down on the edge of the work table. "It wasn't good," Marcus said. "I can't draw." But she said what I drew was that he looked comfortable, that I'd drawn him in a comfortable place. His voice was careful with the things it was carrying. "I didn't know I remembered him comfortable. I thought I only remembered the end." She pressed her palm flat against the work table. "You were 9 when we used to do Saturday crosswords with him," she said. "You were 9 and you refused to let anyone else fill in the ones you knew. You used to fight him about 7 across." A silence. "Yeah," Marcus said. "Yeah, I remember that." They stayed on the phone for 20 minutes. He asked about the center, and she told him about Gerald's new painting, which had been assessed by 3 different students as variously a mountain, a wave, and an extremely abstract dog. Marcus laughed, a real laugh, the kind that didn't have effort in it. She stored the sound of it. Before they hung up, he said, "The guy down the hall here plays guitar. We've been playing together in the common room after dinner." A pause. "He's better than me." "Impossible," Hannah said. "Extremely possible. He's been playing for 30 years. "Then you have something to aim for." "Yeah." She could hear him smiling. "Hey, Han, the thing you're building. Landon told me about it on the visiting day. The center." She stilled. "He told you?" "He came on visiting day." "Did he not tell you that?" He had not told her that. She filed that away with a precise, complicated feeling she didn't immediately name. "He brought Ellie," Marcus continued. "She drew me a picture of a guitar. She labeled it Marcus's guitar in case I wasn't sure." A pause. "She's a good kid, Han." "I know," Hannah said. "The center you're building. I want to be part of it. I'm not asking for anything before I've earned it. But when I'm out, when I've got real time behind me, I want to work with families in the program. People dealing with what our family dealt with." His voice was steady. Not performing steadiness, just having it. "I know what the inside of that looks like. That's got to be worth something." She thought about what he'd said, about the inside of something and what that was worth. "Yeah," she said, "it is." After she hung up, she sat in the mostly dark center for a few minutes with her hands in her lap, doing nothing. Not processing, not planning, just sitting with the particular quality of a moment that was sad and good at the same time, which was the kind of moment that most of her adult life had been made of. She thought about her father at the kitchen table, which Marcus had drawn and which she could see when she closed her eyes. The Saturday morning light, the newspaper folded to the crossword, the argument about 7 across. She thought about the name on the file, employee ID, hire date, 22 years noted. She thought about a man who had read 914 names on a Sunday. She turned off the lights and locked the center and walked out into the June night, which was warm and thick with the particular smell of a city summer beginning, and she called Landon. "Marcus said you came on visiting day," she said when he picked up. "A beat. He told you." "Why didn't you?" "Because I didn't go for credit," he said. "I went because he's your brother, and he's in a difficult place, and I thought it might help to have—" He paused. "To not only have you." She stood on the sidewalk outside the center. A cab went by. Someone's window was open and music was coming out of it, something with a steady bass line. "Ellie drew him a guitar," Hannah said. "She was very committed to the label," Landon said. "She said she was worried he might think it was a piano." The laugh came out of her without warning, a real one, the kind she hadn't heard from herself in a while. She covered her mouth after, not to stop it, just because it surprised her. "Come over," he said. "It's not late. Ellie's still up. She'll be furious if she finds out you were nearby and didn't come." "It's 9:30. She negotiated her bedtime to 10 on Fridays. Don't ask. It was a whole thing." Hannah looked up at the June sky, which was the color of a bruise that was healing. She thought about the kitchen and the garlic smell and the 23 steps and the corner of Linden Street. "I'll be there in 10 minutes, she said. She was there in 8. Ellie was on the couch in pajamas with an expression of aggressive wakefulness, the look of a child who is proving a point about bedtime by being as awake as possible. When Hannah came through the door, Ellie sat up to full height. "I have a new picture," Ellie said. "I assumed," Hannah said, dropping her bag on the hook. "Let's see it." It was a picture of 3 people and an elephant. The 3 people were labeled Daddy, Hannah, me, in Ellie's careful printing. The elephant was labeled Gerald, naturally. They were standing in front of a building that was either a house or a tree, Hannah couldn't fully determine, and the sky above them was the color Ellie always used when she wanted it to look good. Yellow, because she had decided once that yellow was the best sky and had committed to it absolutely. Hannah looked at the drawing for a long time. "Do you like it?" Ellie asked. "Very much," Hannah said. She sat down next to Ellie on the couch, the picture on her knee. "Can I keep this one?" Ellie considered. She had a lending policy about her drawings, it turned out, that was structurally similar to Hannah's library policy at the center. "You can keep it," Ellie said finally. "But you have to hang it up." "I will," Hannah said, "where I can see it every day." Ellie accepted this and settled back into the couch cushion, satisfied. Landon appeared in the kitchen doorway with 2 cups of tea, the specific brand without comment, and handed one to Hannah and sat on the other side of his daughter, who was already beginning to lose her aggressive wakefulness despite herself. By 9:57, Ellie was asleep against his arm. He didn't move. Neither did Hannah. They sat there for a while in the quiet apartment with a sleeping 6-year-old between them and 2 cups of tea going warm and a drawing of 3 people and an elephant in a yellow sky world on Hannah's knee. It was not perfect. There were things unresolved. There were things that would remain unresolved, she knew, for a long time. The weight of what had been lost was not going anywhere. Grief didn't have an endpoint. She had understood that for years. Marcus had 37 days in front of him before he came home, and those 37 days were not guaranteed. The foundation and the institution and the board and Whitfield and all the practical, unglamorous work of building something real were still ahead of them, still requiring the labor of actual people with actual flaws and actual limits. None of that had been resolved. But in the apartment on Linden Street, in the June quiet, Landon looked at her over the head of their sleeping 6-year-old, and she looked back. And what was between them was not hope exactly. It was something more durable than hope, something she had not had a name for, coming in, but was starting to recognize. She looked down at the drawing on her knee. 3 people. An elephant. A yellow sky. She thought, this is what choosing looks like. Not the moment you fall into something, but the moment you look clearly at all of it. The damage, and the love, and the history, and the grief, and the impossible complicated weight of other people. And you choose to stay in the room anyway. She stayed in the room. Marcus came home on a Tuesday. Hannah took the day off. A personal day. The first she had taken all year that wasn't a medical appointment or a crisis. And drove to New Jersey in the early morning to pick him up. She got there 20 minutes early and sat in the parking lot with the engine off, watching the building. It was a converted house in the way that some things are converted and you can still see everything they used to be. The residential bones of it, the front porch, the window boxes that someone had planted with something low and resilient. It did not look like the kind of place that changed people. Most of the places that changed people didn't. Marcus came out at 9:03 with his guitar case on his back and a duffel bag that looked heavier than when she'd brought it, because he'd accumulated things. Books, mostly, she found out later, and a journal he'd been keeping since week 3 that he did not show her and she did not ask to see. He looked different. Not dramatically. Not in the way of before and after photographs, which she had always distrusted. He just looked like someone who had been somewhere and come back and was still working out what to do with what they'd brought with them. His shoulders were less caved in. He was still thin but filling back out. He looked, most specifically, like he was inhabiting himself with slightly less apology than before. He put his bag in the trunk and got in the car and looked at her. 62 days, he said. 62 days, she said back. She drove. He put the window down an inch even though it was barely warm enough for it, the way he always did. He had always needed moving air, even as a kid, had always been the one to crack the window on family car trips while their father complained about the draft. She thought about their father. She thought about him in the car on the bridge back over into Brooklyn, and she let herself think about him without the usual effort to redirect, the deliberate pivot away that she had trained herself into over years of managing the grief in increments she could survive. She let herself think about him the way Marcus had described drawing him, comfortable, at the kitchen table, the crossword, 7 across. It hurt the way it always hurt. It was also, somehow, more bearable than it had been in a long time, and she couldn't fully explain why except that some things became more bearable when you stopped trying to manage them alone. "Tell me what you're thinking about," Marcus said. "Dad," she said. He nodded. He looked out his window at the city coming up on both sides of the bridge. "I think about him differently now," he said. He's not just the end of the story anymore. The counselor helped me see more of the middle." He paused. "He was a person, not just our dad, a person who had a thing he was proud of and lost it and couldn't find a way back." He was quiet for a moment. "I understand that better now than I wanted to. Understanding it doesn't mean, I know." He looked at her. "I know it doesn't mean I'm going to do the same thing. That's actually what I've been working on. The difference between understanding something and being sentenced to repeat it." She glanced at him. "And?" "And they're different," he said. "That's the work. Knowing they're different." A pause. "I'm not him. I'm also not nothing like him. I've got to figure out what to do with both of those things." She drove without saying anything because that didn't need a response. That was just true. They stopped for breakfast at a diner in Carroll Gardens that they had gone to exactly once before, years ago, when Marcus was 15 and they had both been pretending not to be stressed about something neither of them could remember now. The diner looked identical. They ordered the same way they always ordered. Hannah overthought it and then got eggs and toast. Marcus got the thing with the most components on the menu without reading it carefully and was always surprised by what arrived. A Belgian waffle appeared in front of him. He looked at it. "I didn't know this was going to be a waffle situation. You never read the menu." "I'm an optimist." He picked up his fork. "So, tell me about the building." The building was a former warehouse space in Bed-Stuy. 4 stories, north-facing windows on the top 2 floors, freight elevator, a loading dock in the back that could be converted to an outdoor program space. Landon had found it through a commercial real estate contact in March, and Hannah had walked through it 3 times before she said yes. The first time alone? the second time with Sasha, the third time with Landon and Ellie, who had run the perimeter of the main ground floor shouting to hear her echo, and then declared it a good building in a tone that suggested her endorsement should carry weight in the process. Hannah told Marcus about the building. She told him about the layout, the ground floor for intake, community space, and the family support programs, the second floor for the arts and education programs, the third floor for workforce training and counseling, the fourth floor for administrative offices, and the Mentorship Coordination Center. She told him about the partnerships she was building with 3 public schools in the surrounding area, and the referral pipeline they were developing with family services organizations, and the artist residency program she and Sasha had designed that would bring working artists in to run extended workshops rather than one-off events. She told him about Gerald, who had agreed to be the first resident artist, and had cried when she asked him in a way that made her have to look at the ceiling for a moment. Marcus listened to all of it with his waffle going mostly uneaten. "And me," he said when she paused, "where do I come in?" "I want you to develop the family recovery support program," she said. "Not run it alone. We're partnering with licensed counselors and family therapists for the clinical components. But the peer mentorship side, the part that requires someone who's been inside it." She looked at him directly. "That's yours to design if you want it. I'm not handing you a role out of obligation. I'm asking because you're the most qualified person I know for a specific thing that needs to exist." He was quiet for a long moment. He looked at his waffle. He picked up his fork again and ate a piece of it, and she could see him sitting with the weight of being offered something real at a moment when he was still finding out how much weight he could carry. "I'd want to do the training," he said. "Proper certification, whatever's required. Already built into the timeline. We've identified a program. 12 weeks, starts in September." He looked at her. "You already planned for this." "I had a strong hypothesis." He was quiet for another moment. Outside the diner window, a woman was walking a dog that was walking her, really, hauling her cheerfully down the sidewalk while she held the leash with both hands. Marcus watched this. Then he looked back at Hannah. "Okay," he said. "Yeah, I want to do it." She nodded. She drank her coffee. She did not make it sentimental because he didn't need sentiment right now. He needed structure and forward motion and something that confirmed the future was a place he was allowed to go. She had learned this about him slowly and the hard way, and it was one of the more useful things she had ever learned. "Finish your waffle," she said. "I'm getting there," he said. The building broke ground, or rather, the renovation began, since it was a conversion rather than new construction, in early July. Hannah stood outside on the morning the contractors arrived with coffee from Fernanda's and watched them begin the process of making a warehouse into something else, and she felt a thing she had almost forgotten the shape of. Uncomplicated forward motion. The sense of something being built rather than managed. Landon stood beside her. He had his own coffee. He was not wearing the jacket she had first seen him in. It was July, early and already warm, and he was in a gray t-shirt with a small stain on the left sleeve that he had noticed and not addressed, which was something she had come to understand about him. He was meticulous about work and relatively unbothered by small domestic failures. She found this ratio appealing in a way she had not bothered to analyze. "You're not saying anything," he said. "I'm watching." "What are you thinking?" She considered how honest to be. She chose all the way honest, which was where she usually ended up anyway. "I'm thinking about whether I deserve this," she said. "The thing I get to build. I'm not being self-deprecating. I'm asking genuinely. Because my father didn't get to build something. He spent 22 years building something that got taken away. And I'm standing here watching the thing I get to build." She paused. "I'm trying to figure out what I'm supposed to do with the fact that I got lucky." Landon was quiet for a moment. "You didn't get lucky," he said. "You built something under conditions that would have ended most people. The center in Bushwick, your classroom. Marcus. You built all of that before this." He looked at the building. "This is just the part where the building has walls." She looked at him. That was almost poetic. "Don't tell anyone. I have a reputation." "As what?" "As someone who communicates primarily in financial analysis." She laughed. It came out easy, the way laughter had been coming easier in general for the past few months, and she noted that without making too much of it. He looked at her when she laughed. He did that, registered it specifically, like it was something he kept track of. She had noticed it months ago and said nothing about it because it made her feel too directly seen for casual acknowledgement. "I have something to tell you," he said. She looked at him. "The Whitfield situation." He kept his eyes on the building. "He called an emergency board meeting 2 weeks ago. I didn't tell you because I was handling it, and I didn't want to bring you into a board conflict that wasn't yours to manage." "Landon, let me finish." He turned to face her. He made the argument I expected, that the employee impact review was slowing the acquisition process, that the 60-day timeline was costing us a viable deal, and that my judgment had been, his word, contaminated by a personal relationship with someone who had a financial and emotional interest in challenging the company's historical practices. A pause. "He called you by name." Hannah held his gaze. "What happened?" Sasha had documentation on the review process. The data we'd gathered in 60 days was more comprehensive than anything the due diligence team had produced in previous acquisitions. She presented it as a risk management tool, which it is. 3 board members who had been neutral came down on our side. He paused. Whitfield resigned from the board after the vote. She processed that. "How do you feel about it?" He thought about this genuinely, which she appreciated. "Relieved," he said. "And I kept thinking about what you said, that you don't argue values with people who don't share them. You argue function." He looked at her. "We didn't win because we were right about the human cost. We won because Sasha proved the review process reduces liability. The right thing happened for complicated reasons." "That's how right things usually happen," Hannah said. "Does that bother you?" "Less than it used to." She looked back at the building where the contractors were carrying equipment through the loading dock. "I spent a long time thinking that if you argued clearly enough from the right principles, people would come around. My father believed that. He believed the company would see his value." She paused. "But people act from interest. The trick is making the right thing also the thing in their interest." She looked at him. "You did that. You taught me to. You were willing to learn it. That's different." He was looking at her with the expression she had come to know, the one that was not performing anything, just receiving. She looked back and did not look away. "I want to tell you something," she said. "Okay?" "When I came to that dinner, that first night," she held his gaze, "I had thought about what I would do if I met you. I had been angry for a long time, and anger needs somewhere to go, and for a while you were where it went. I had built a version of you." She paused. "I want you to know that the version I built was wrong, not innocent. What happened to my father's career, what it set in motion, that was real. But the version of you I carried was a shape, not a person, and it was wrong." She paused. "I should have told you earlier that I knew who you were. Every week I didn't tell you. I was carrying something in the space between us. That wasn't fair to either of us." He held her gaze for a moment. "I spent a year after my wife died," he said slowly, "being very certain that I understood what I owed people, what I owed Ellie, what I owed my employees, what I owed the foundation. I had it very organized, very clearly structured." A pause. "And then I walked over to correct a glassware mistake, and you looked at me like you were measuring something, and I could not fit you into any structure I had." He looked at the building. "You made me see what I hadn't been seeing. I don't know if I can fully explain what that costs a person who thought they had everything accounted for." "It costs," she agreed. "Yes." He looked at her. "But I'd rather see it than not." She nodded. She turned back to the building. They stood together in the July morning heat, watching the thing they were building get 1 hour closer to existing. The Brooks Creative Learning Center opened its doors on a Saturday in early November. Hannah had not wanted a ceremony. Landon had suggested a soft opening, just the program's beginning, the doors open, people arriving because they had heard about it and needed what was inside. No ribbon, no speeches. Sasha had compromised them into a brief gathering on the Friday evening before, just staff and partners, and a handful of the community organizations they were working with, which was as public as Hannah was willing to go before the thing was real. The Friday gathering was held in the main ground floor space, which smelled of fresh paint and the specific clean smell of new wood floors and the coffee someone had brought from a place down the block. Gerald had been working in the second-floor studio all week and had produced 3 pieces that were hung along the north wall because Sasha said the space needed something on the walls before people arrived, and Gerald said he'd have things ready, and he had been ready by Wednesday. Marcus was there. He had been there every day of the final 2 weeks of construction, learning the building the way he learned things he cared about, thoroughly, with questions, arriving early. He had started his certification training in September and was 2 months in, doing well by his own understated accounting and doing very well by his supervisor's less understated one. He moved through the Friday gathering with the specific ease of someone who knew where everything was and had opinions about how the chairs were arranged. Landon stood with Hannah at the back of the room while the gathering happened around them, people looking at Gerald's paintings, Sasha explaining the referral pipeline to a family services director, Marcus talking to a counselor from one of the partner organizations with the focused body language of someone taking notes in their head. "How do you feel?" Landon asked. "Ask me tomorrow," she said. "When the first person walks in who actually needs it." He nodded. He understood that distinction. The difference between the thing you build and the thing the building becomes when people start using it for what it was made for. Ellie was there too, in a dress she had selected herself based on criteria she had not fully disclosed, but which appeared to involve the color yellow, carrying Gerald the elephant in the crook of her arm. She had been part of the building's life in the way children become part of things their parents care about, through accumulation, through presence, through the slow absorption of something into the texture of ordinary life. She knew the freight elevator made a sound on the 3rd floor. She knew the studio on the 2nd floor got good light in the afternoon. She knew Hannah kept a specific brand of colored pencils in the top drawer of the administrative office desk, and that those pencils were not for taking but were for supervised use. She came to stand beside Hannah at some point in the evening, the elephant under her arm, and looked at the room with an expression of serious assessment. "It's good," Ellie said. "You think so?" "Gerald looks good on the wall." She pointed at the largest painting. "He did the sky right." Hannah looked at the painting, the landscape, the improbable color Ellie meant, the particular combination of things that made it look like light rather than paint. "He always does the sky right," Hannah said. Ellie nodded, satisfied, and went back into the gathering. Landon was watching his daughter move through the room. Hannah watched him watch her, the way she had been doing for months now. These small, private moments of a man and his child that she had been allowed into gradually, not as a guest anymore, as something that didn't have a clean name yet but was solidifying around the edges. "She's going to be something," Hannah said. "I know." He said it without false modesty or excessive pride, just acknowledgement. "I just hope I'm doing enough of the right things to deserve watching it." "You're doing enough." He looked at her. "You don't know that." "I have a professional opinion. I've seen a lot of parents. The ones who are doing it right always think they're not doing enough. It's the ones who never wonder who you have to worry about." She paused. "You're going to be fine." He held her gaze. "Thank you," he said. He meant it beyond the sentence. "Don't thank me," she said. "Just keep showing up." He smiled. Slowly, the real one. 73 steps, he said. "What?" 23 at bedtime, 50 more I've been counting without realizing it. He paused. "Every time you came over. Every time you showed up at the center. Every Tuesday at Fernanda's. Every time you handed me something difficult to look at and waited to see if I would look." He held her gaze. "I've been counting." She looked at him. She was not going to cry at her own opening. She had decided this firmly in advance. "That's a lot of steps," she said. "It's a long walk," he said. "Worth it." She shook her head, but not in disagreement. The first person who came through the door on Saturday morning was a woman named Patricia, 38 years old, referred by one of the partner family services organizations. She had 2 kids, 9 and 11, and she had been trying to get the older one into an after-school arts program for 2 years, but the wait list at the school-affiliated programs never cleared. She walked in at 9:15 with both kids and looked around at the space the way people look at things they had started to believe weren't going to exist for them. Hannah was at the intake desk when they came in, not because she was supposed to be, Sasha had built a proper intake staff, but because she wanted to be there for the first one. Patricia looked at her and said, "Is this really free?" "It's really free. Hannah said. Patricia looked around again. At the walls, the light, the hallway leading back to the studios. My son, she said. He draws constantly, on everything. His teacher keeps having to call me about the notebooks. She paused. She means it as a problem. It's not a problem, Hannah said. Patricia looked at her for a moment. No, she said. I know it's not. Hannah showed them the second-floor studio. The 9-year-old, the drawer, whose name was Andre, walked in and stopped in the doorway the way people stopped in doorways when a room had the right light, looking at the windows and the long work tables and Gerald's piece on the north wall. He was quiet for a moment. Can I use that? He pointed at the oil pastel set on the nearest table. That's what it's there for, Hannah said. He sat down. He opened the set. He looked at the blank sheet of paper in front of him with the specific focused quality of someone who has been given something they did not expect and is trying to understand the full dimensions of it before they begin. Hannah stood in the doorway of the studio and watched him look at the paper, and she thought about an 8-year-old girl she had lost track of, whose name she could not remember anymore. Only the quality of her work, the spatial reasoning, the color instinct, the way she saw things. She thought about all the rooms without light in them, all the drawers full of work that no one had assessed, all the people who were good at things the world had given them nowhere to be good at. She thought about her father. She thought about 22 years in a crossword and 7 across. She thought about the shape of a person's life and what it meant that some shapes got to expand and others got compressed by forces the people inside them did not choose. And she thought about the fact that understanding this did not make it just, but also that doing nothing about it in the face of understanding was a different kind of choosing. She had been choosing, she understood now, for a long time. In the small accumulated choosing of kept lights and late hours and a library system nobody respected and a canvas tote full of donated supplies in the rain. She had been building something before she knew what she was building, the way people do when they are responding to something true in themselves before they have language for it. The building had walls now. That was what Landon had said. She turned from the doorway and walked back down to the ground floor, where Marcus was setting up his first group session space, chairs arranged in a circle, not in rows, which was a decision he had made deliberately and explained to her once in terms that were clearer than anything in the training materials. He was moving the last chair into position when she came in. He looked up. How is he? Marcus asked. He meant Andre, who he'd seen go up the stairs. Good, Hannah said. He went straight for the oil pastels. Marcus nodded. He looked at the circle of chairs. He straightened the last one an unnecessary amount. Then he looked at her. Hey, Han. What? You did a good thing. She looked at the chairs, at the room, at her brother's face, which had color in it again, which had the look of someone arriving somewhere rather than leaving. We did, she said. He accepted the correction. Landon found her later, in the late afternoon when the Saturday's first programs had ended, and the building was doing the quiet thing that buildings do after people leave, settling, resounding, holding the echo of what had been in it. She was in the second-floor studio, putting supplies back in order, and he came up the freight elevator with 2 coffees and Ellie, who had spent the afternoon with the 9-year-old sister in the kids' area downstairs and was now carrying a drawing she had made with the other girl, already explaining its contents to her father in detail. Hannah took her coffee. Ellie climbed onto a stool at the work table and spread her drawing out. It was a picture of a building, which was clearly meant to be this building, with many small figures going in and out of the door. Each figure had a different color, which Ellie explained was because everyone who came in was different, and the building was for everyone, and she wanted to show that. That was your idea? Hannah asked. I had it during lunch, Ellie said. Camille agreed it was good. Camille is the 9-year-old sister, Landon clarified. She's 8, Ellie corrected him, with the precision of someone for whom age distinctions are a matter of principle. Hannah looked at the drawing. Many small figures going in and out of a door, each one different, each one belonging. Can I put this one on the wall? She asked. In the building? Ellie looked at her seriously. Which wall? The hallway downstairs where people come in first. Ellie considered. Okay, she said, but in a frame, not just tape. Deal, Hannah said. Ellie hopped off the stool and went to investigate the charcoal sticks in the supply cabinet. Landon and Hannah stood at the window, looking out at the Bed-Stuy street below. The Saturday afternoon of it, people moving, a kid on a bike, someone's music coming from an open window above the building across the way. "One day," he said, "don't make speeches." "I'm not making a speech. I'm saying, one day, one afternoon, the first one." "It was a good one," she said. "Yes," he said. "It was." She thought about Patricia looking at the intake desk, asking if it was really free. She thought about Andre and the oil pastels and the specific quality of a person receiving something they had stopped expecting. She thought about Marcus and his circle of chairs, and Gerald and his walls, and Sasha with her mechanical pencil and her relentless competence, and Fernanda who had raised an eyebrow on a rainy Tuesday night and never asked a single intrusive question. She thought about her father. She let herself think about him, here in this room, without the effort of managing it. She thought about what he had given her, the steadiness, the patience, the belief that things built slowly and honestly were worth more than things that arrived fast. He had given her that before he lost it himself, and she had carried it without knowing she was carrying it. And now it was in the walls of a building in Bed-Stuy with many-colored figures going in and out of a door. She did not have a clean resolution for his loss. She was not going to get one. That was something she had arrived at slowly. The understanding that some things did not resolve, they just became part of the material you were made of, woven in rather than removed. The grief was still there. It would always be there. But it was not only grief anymore. It was also this room and these walls, and a boy named Andre who had gone straight for the oil pastels, and a brother who set chairs in circles instead of rows. She felt Landon's hand find hers at the window. She turned her palm and held it. From the supply cabinet, Ellie said, "These are the good charcoals, the ones that don't crumble." "I know," Hannah said. "I ordered them specifically." "Smart," Ellie said with the authority of someone whose opinion on art supplies had been cultivated over several months of intensive exposure. Hannah looked at the street below, at the building's shadow falling across the sidewalk in the late November afternoon. Long and reaching, the way shadows went in that season, angled and impermanent, and somehow exactly the right size. She thought, this is what it looks like. Not the ending of something, but the actual texture of a life you've chosen. It isn't smooth. It isn't finished. Marcus had 122 days behind him and a long road still in front of him, and there would be hard days she couldn't predict and couldn't prevent. Landon still woke at 2 a.m. with his mind processing things that refused to wait. She still pushed people away when she was scared and called it something else. Ellie would grow up and have her own grief about her mother, the complicated, specific grief of not remembering someone who shaped you anyway. And Hannah would not always know the right thing to say. None of it was resolved into cleanliness. It was just held by the structure they had built together out of honesty and accountability and the unglamorous labor of choosing each other on the ordinary days, not just the dramatic ones. She knew, standing at that window, that this was the thing she had been unable to name for months. Not hope. Something more durable than hope. The knowledge that you have people, specific, flawed, irreplaceable people, who will be in the room when it matters, who will read the names when it's necessary, who will set chairs in circles and hang drawings in frames and walk you to the corner every time, without being asked. She had spent 6 years being the person who was in the room for other people. She had not known, until recently, that she was also allowed to let people be in the room for her. Outside, the street went on doing what streets did. Inside, Ellie was drawing something new, narrating its progress to no one in particular. Landon's hand was in hers. The building was quiet in the way of things that have just been used for their actual purpose. Hannah Brooks looked at the street and thought about her father, and about a room with lights left on late, and about the 8-year-old girl whose name she couldn't remember but whose way of seeing she had spent years trying to make a place for. She thought, I hope you found a room with lights on, wherever you are. I hope someone kept the door open. She thought, we're keeping it open now. She stood at the window in her building, in the last light of a November afternoon, with her brother downstairs and her person beside her, and a 6-year-old behind her narrating the progress of a drawing that would go on the wall in a frame, and she let that be enough. It was enough. It was more than enough. It was the kind of thing her father would have called, on a Saturday morning, over a crossword, in the kitchen in Queens before everything changed. The whole point. She thought he was right about that. She had always thought he was right about that.